So I'm Joost Van Hoof from the Netherlands, professor of urban aging in The Hague. And I was just telling that populations all across the world are getting older, especially so in Europe and less so in Australia. But even in Australia, we see a lot of population aging. And this is like a global phenomenon. Even in Africa, though Africa is in the gray, but they will have, in absolute terms, more, or in absolute numbers, more older people in years to come. And the speed at which population aging takes place is also increasing. This is the reason why almost 20 years ago, in 2007, the WHO came up with a program called Global Age-Friendly Cities. And it was actually developed after a IAGG conference in Rio de Janeiro in 2005. So it's been 20 years. And back in the days, they were still talking about elder-friendly and elderly-friendly communities, because that was a new, hot, emerging topic in the US and in Canada, especially in Alberta state and in British Columbia. And based on the notions from North America, the WHO developed this program. And it was launched in 2007 with this document, and it had an appendix called the Checklist of Essential Features of Age-Friendly Cities, which reads a bit like a menu in a restaurant with lots of features and design solutions that you can choose from. And the program revolves around 8 topics or 8 domains, which you see here. So you got the ones which are more related to the physical environment, like transport and mobility, housing and the outdoor environment, outdoor spaces and buildings. That's where the engineers come in. You got the municipal services like community and health services, but also communication and information. And then there is the social environment that I like to focus on, working for a faculty of social work, which is about civic engagement and employment, about social inclusion and respect, or non-discrimination, and social participation. And these are the turning buttons of a radio, so to say, that you can tune, and you can come up with action programs around these 8 domains and try to improve the lives and well-being of older people in your city. If you look at the program, it's not just a program that was launched in 2007, but there's a whole ecosystem behind it. There is a website called the Age-Friendly World, which has access, provides access to the wider community, but also to the so-called WHO Global Network. And there is a website with age-friendly practices and a resource library. And being the chairperson of Age-Friendly The Hague, it allows me to share our findings and our products with a wider community. This is one of the manifestos, but I will talk about that later. So here you see a map of the global network for age-friendly cities and communities that was set up in the year 2010. So that's 15 years ago, as a way for cities to interact with one another, and cities could actually sign up for membership, and they did it in massive numbers. And what you see on the map in the red are the red dots, or the red dots are actually the cities that have signed up for membership and have been granted membership. And you can see that many of them can be found in North America and in Western Europe. New Zealand and Australia are very active as well. And then there's this huge cluster in South America. You'll also see that even though it was founded in 2010, has been around for 15 years, we have 1,700 members worldwide, and they represent 60 countries, and that was the status quo in July 2025. So it's been a highly successful program. Only 2 years ago, this brochure was published. It's a national programs for age-friendly cities, a guide. And the WHO said, we have too many cities that have become member, we can't manage. So it would be nice if countries come up with national programs for age friendliness, so that there's more of a clustering taking place, so it's better for us to manage whatever's going on. So that's why you saw on the previous slide that some of the countries were represented by a dark blue color, like New Zealand. New Zealand has a national program. Australia is a bit of an outlier here, because Western Australia and Queensland have a state, on the state level, they have not a national program, but a state program on age friendliness. And that's why I think we don't see any members from Queensland in this map. And Australia has been very active in this movement right from the start. The Australians were actually involved in the development of the age-friendly program, even though it doesn't really feature in the text, but I know this. So Australia has been like a key player right from the start, has been quite essential in moving the program forward in the last 2 decades. And going back to my part of the world, you see there's a lot of activity going on in Spain, in Ireland, also in Slovenia, to a lesser extent in France and in Wallonia, that's the French-speaking part of Belgium. And some countries are actually missing from the equation. If you look at places like Italy and Germany, not that much activity, probably because the brochures were not written in German or in Italian, and you know how it goes. There were brochures available in Spanish and in English, but if you work in Europe and it's not available in your own national language, it doesn't really take off. So it actually makes you wonder why the Slovenians were so active. Probably there were some grants available there. So if I zoom in on the Netherlands, I actually see that the map needs to be updated because WHO didn't do it. But in the Netherlands, we had 2 cities, according to the WHO, that were member, which are Amsterdam and The Hague. And this is actually not correct. The Hague was the first country, the first city to sign up for the network, followed by Amsterdam, also in 2015. And last year, 2 municipalities, the one of Eindhoven and one in Helmond, which are down south, signed up, and municipality of Tilburg joined earlier this year. And they actually focus on the arts and old age. And they say, we want to explore that niche. So all of these cities have their own niche, their own reason why they joined. If you look at The Hague, is where I'm from, the most famous person living in The Hague is actually not our king. It's the girl with the pearl earring that everybody seems to know. She's only a couple of 100 meters away from my office. I always say it's the better version of Amsterdam. We still have the canals. We don't have the British tourists with the stag parties. It's a peaceful city, known for its relation with the United Nations. So we got the Peace Palace with the International Court of Justice. It's a seaside city, so in summertime, it's horribly crowded on the beach. Everybody wants to go there. But it's a nice city. These are the Houses of Parliament, because even though we're not the capital city of the country, all the politicians are there. It's like Canberra in a way. And it's really a nice place. So if you ever come visit the Netherlands, skip Amsterdam, come to The Hague. We have much better stuff to offer. That was my touristic plug. But overall, if you're in The Hague, what do you notice of being age friendly? Not that much, you would say. Well, actually, older people are all over the town, because more than 21% of our population is made up by people aged 65 and older, and 96% of them live in the community. They don't live in a nursing home or anywhere else. They just live out on their own, and they're very, very visible in the cityscape. Public transportation is available to them, discounted rates. All entrances to trams, buses are level access, so there's no need to climb stairs and so on. That's all been taken care of years and years ago. So whether you walk around with a pram or with a with a walker, it doesn't matter. That's all taken care of. And The Hague is known for a great level of cultural and ethnic diversity. What you see here, a group that we call Hindustani Surinamese people. So it's people originally from India that were back in the day shipped to work in the sugarcane industry in Suriname, and they came to the Netherlands in '75 or right before the independence of their country, because they thought that life in the Netherlands would indeed be better. And they are the richest group that we have in our city because they're all very entrepreneurial, but they have their own daycare facilities and they meet with one another. And we have, I don't know how many ethnic groups in our city, and they also self-organize for their interests. So it's quite an interesting city that I work in. If you sign up for this age-friendly global network, what do you commit yourself to as a city? Well, you have this 5-year cycle that you should adhere to some extent. So in the first 2 years, you start making plans, age-friendly plans, which ideally involve older people. And this is something that in The Hague we do quite rigorously. So we want to give older people a say, and I will show that later. And it also involves development of action plans. Then in the years after, you start implementing, as you do with any policy recommendations or policy plans that are being developed at the town hall. And eventually and ideally, after 5 years, you evaluate the progress and you start the cycle all over again. And what I found in recent years is that a lot of the cities that have signed up for the network are actually doing some of the planning. Some actually enjoy having a certificate and do nothing. I need to be very honest about this. But some people make it into the planning stage and implementation, but they don't do the evaluation because there's not much available for them to do a proper evaluation. And this is quite problematic in my view. In The Hague, we have this so-called knowledge platform, and you only see a selection of people on the photo, but we have dozens of people who are part of this platform. So we have representatives of older people's organizations, of welfare and healthcare organizations, of the municipality, researchers, social entrepreneurs. The public health services are involved as well. And I'm chairing this group of people, and the aim of the platform is to actually assess and measure the impact of municipal strategies to be and to become an age-friendly city. And we also do like a biannual survey of or an evaluation of the age-friendliness of our city. And we come up with policy recommendations together with the Urban Committee of Older Citizens, which we send directly to the town hall, to the alderman responsible for aging and older citizens. And this is something that really kicked off when I took over in 2020. Because I remember in 2019, the alderman for older people came to me and she said, I have a problem, Joost. I'm from the Conservative Liberal Party. I think there's no Australian equivalent, but they are focused on return on investment. And we've been spending millions of euros, taxpayer money, on age-friendliness, and I simply don't know if the money was well spent. So I want you as a professor to come up with an evaluation report and tell me exactly how age-friendly my city is and if money was well spent. And I was thinking to myself, oh, that's a nice assignment. I said, yes, will do. I remember going home, cracked open a bottle of wine because I got a panic attack, like, oh, am I gonna pull that off? I overpromised. I'm very happy that I got a good group of people that I work with. This is our town hall. It was designed by a very famous American architect, Richard Meyer, who is known for his white buildings. It's called the Ice Palace because of the way it looks. Looks like a refrigerator in a way, but architects love it. Doesn't really blend in well with the rest of the architecture. But I had a question. It was like, how do you measure the age friendliness of a city? Apart from having interviews with people, how do you actually measure it? How do you turn it into hard numbers, like an accountant would do? And to be very honest, I think the lack of measurability of the age friendliness was and is a weakness in moving the agenda forward. A lot of cities were struggling with the evaluation. And if you look at the 5-year cycle, there simply was no solution. There was no manual. There was no nothing available for these cities. So as a last resort, a lot of people use the checklist, the menu that I was talking about, and we're just ticking boxes like, okay, we got 38 out of 50 of these elements taken care of by our city. But that's not a good way to evaluate age friendliness. And in 2015, the WHO came up with a set of core indicators. But again, a lot of mayors, a lot of town halls said, just some data from the Bureau of Statistics. That's not listening to the real voices, to the lived experiences of all the people. So that's not suitable. And I've been writing a lot of critical commentaries about this, that we need more evidence-based design recommendations, that we need to have something that's measurable. And that rather scathing commentary I actually wrote at WHO is a bit of propagating quackery, because they are pushing a narrative which is not measurable. And that's, in my view, unacceptable from an organization like the WHO. To make matters worse, in 2015, they came up with this beautiful brochure called Measuring the Age Friendliness of Cities, but they wrote in a sort of disclaimer, like, age friendliness is a complex, dynamic, and multidimensional concept, which is also highly context dependent, and it does not easily lend itself to standardization of measurement. Why on earth would you publish a brochure like this if you write that? Sorry, but it doesn't go well with me. And being Dutch, being direct, being blunt sometimes, yeah, well, we're not like the British. We are close neighbors, but we are like total opposites when it comes to sharing criticism. I don't like that. You know, and I have a background in engineering myself. I want things to be measurable and tangible. So I said, well, the whole list of core indicators summed up in this document do not capture the lived experiences of people. And that's what it's all about, real experiences, because with real experiences, you can go back to politicians and have a nice discussion. So as a consequence, there's not much around except for unvalidated lists and indicators, and it's simply not satisfactory for members who signed up for this global network. And it's not that there wasn't anything around, but there were a very limited number of incomplete quantitative methods developed in England, but also in America. But they all failed to validate the WHO model, because we often forget that the model by the WHO was never validated. It was just developed through political lobby. And I know it was all done with noble intentions, but it was never validated. So we had to resort to more qualitative approaches. So there were some really good papers that came out of the University of South Australia, from Adelaide, a group led by Helen Barry. Really good work on citizen science, very useful, and we use that as a basis for our own endeavors. But yeah, 5 years ago, I said to my colleague Jeroen Dikke, like, we need to come up with something better. So we used the Cosmin protocol and we developed this AFCCQ. And people always say, oh yeah, well, a survey is easy. Let's just come up with a simple list of questions. This is not about the details, but it's about the rigor that we try to put into the process with all these steps that we went through. And we developed a instrument together with all the people. I think we had about 50 older people helping us out in various stages of this procedure. And in the end, we came up with a 23-item questionnaire, which involves all the 8 domains of the WHO. And we didn't realize that back in the days, but there were people from Bahrain who actually reached out to me. He said, you were actually the first who validated the WHO model. And I said to myself, is that really true? But it was true. We managed to validate it for the first time. And yeah, we came up with this survey, 23 questions with a 5-point Likert scale. But we also found that one domain was missing, and that was one's financial situation, whether you're rich or poor, if you can make ends meet by the end of the month. And I actually had some work from Hong Kong that were hinting towards the importance of one's financial situation. So that's what I nicked more or less from them, and I said this is something that could actually be a separate domain. Let's put it in, and it actually turned out to be the strongest predictor for experiencing age friendliness. But because the WHO doesn't have it as a separate category or a separate domain, it is often overlooked by policymakers and politicians, which is quite problematic, or is very problematic. In the end, you can calculate the questions, you can add up the scores, and you come up with numbers which you can show more or less as a traffic light. So if you're in the red, you have a problem. If you're in the green, then you're pretty fine, but there's always room for improvement. And this really helps when talking to politicians and policymakers, because nobody likes to be in the red. And if you're in the red in my country, you have a lot of explanation to do. And even the accountants that work for the municipality will come after you because you need to do better. And I think this is actually the best of the instrument. So by now, we have moved on 5 years later. Both the UN Decade of Healthy Aging, the WHO, and the European Commission have named our tool as a best practice. Pat on my own shoulder, no, of my team. But it's nice to see that it's been embraced more or less, and we've been doing validations now in over 35 countries. So what does it look like in practice? I will not go into the details, but we did this in The Hague a couple of times, also last autumn. We're all in the, generally we're all in the green, but we do see that we have some issues, especially with social participation, which plummeted during the times of COVID, and it has not recovered to its old level. So that's the kind of stuff that we take out of these surveys. And we also saw that housing, the scores for housing are actually quite good, but there's a lot of policy efforts being funneled towards housing. And I said, maybe the priorities need to be different, and we need to focus more on the social participation and on outdoor spaces and buildings, which score the lowest. Just a narrow pass, just went over the threshold, but it's not good enough. And why is that? Well, in the Netherlands, we are partly built on marshland, so the pavements tend to sink away because the ground is shrinking, because water gets pumped out of the marshlands. It's peat soil, so it subsides, it just shrinks. A lot of uneven pavements, and a lot of people actually topple over. So that's one of the biggest complaints heard in my country. But if you look at the averages, that doesn't really satisfy a lot of people. So it's more important to actually know who are the people behind the numbers. So we came up with clusters, and Stephen is very familiar with this. We came up with clusters, and we actually have a group we call the precariat. It's people who score negatively on their personal income, on their disposable income. It's not satisfactory. So overall, they score the lowest. It's still okay, because we are modest people. Even when we complain, we still don't say it's a fail. But overall, we have a problem here, and it's 1/6 of the population. Then we have people who are affected by mobility issues, mobility impairments, and they also score rather low on the age friendliness. We have a very large group, which we call the average satisfied Dutch citizen. I know in New Zealand, we call them the managing group. And actually, it's a better term. I like it better. But that's half of the population, and they're doing quite well. But if they experience a life event, like the loss of a partner or a spouse, or they fall ill, then they run the risk of becoming a person in cluster 1 or 2. And then we got the higher echelons, like the rich, the well-off. They own their own house, no mortgage, they're in good health. They have very high scores overall. And for me, this was really interesting, because a lot of these differences are actually dictated by socioeconomic factors and health, and not by other things. But if you don't measure income, or whether people can live off their money that they still have, you don't see this picture. You don't see this. You don't see this broader picture. Which actually brings me to one thing that I still don't understand is why these financial factors were overlooked in the first place. Because even in, like back in the days, one of the founding fathers of the age-friendly movement wrote so passionately about poverty and that it's health's worst enemy. So if you were so outspoken back in the days, why did you take it out of the equation in the first place? I still don't understand. So me and a pal from England, we wrote a book chapter together, which was published only 2 or 3 weeks ago. We gave it a rather provocative title, which I like. So who doesn't think about financial security when designing urban environments for older people? Well, and we actually advocate for the inclusion of financial factors in the age-friendly agenda, and especially when the WHO wants to do an overhaul of the model, this is one of the things they really need to put in. If they don't, then it's not worth much. And problem is that I know that they have known all along, because these are this is a screenshot from the original documentation that they used in the development process 20 years ago. They had a whole paragraph on economic influences, but through political lobby it was taken out. But it turns out to be the most important factor. So I think they need to do something about it. So in the Netherlands, coming back to these 4 clusters, we gave them a face, we gave them like a personality, and this has become like really important for the policies in our city, because the policymakers embrace these 4 personas, and we have abandoned the idea of having a one-size-fits-all approach for our aging populations. We now have a more diverse set of policy recommendations. I think it's really good to say that both of the groups with problems or challenges, so the ones with the mobility issues and the financial issues, we have an overrepresentation of older females. That's because of the way that the older women were not represented in the labor market in the old days, because they had a spouse, like a male spouse who was bringing in the money. The women were taking care of the children. But if the male spouse dies, the widow is left, I wouldn't say with empty pockets, but they only get half of the superannuation in our system, which is rather unfair, but it's the way it is. So they actually run the risk of becoming poor at old age, or having financial struggles. We have an overrepresentation of migrants, of people who were born outside of the country, especially the ones who are less entrepreneurial, but came as refugees in later life. They also run the risk of finding themselves in financial turmoil. So what we do, like a year ago in summer, when I was also in Australia, but my colleagues were doing their summer tour through the city center, and they were trying to reach out to people who are hard to reach out to. So not the highly educated people who are really, really vocal. We wanted to talk to people in deprived neighborhoods, so to say, where we have a lot of migrants who would else not show up and let their voices be heard. And we had a lot of focus groups and nice sessions there, and with representatives from the migrant communities, with the Chinese older people. And we just wanted to diversify the set of opinions that we had resounding at the town hall. And this was very fruitful, because we have now also formed a panel of people who normally don't participate in surveys, but we can now reach them to have their voices heard as well. And only 2 months ago, we came up with this, it's an action line, age-friendly The Hague for the next 5 years. And what I like about this policy briefing for the next 5 years, that we have these 4 clusters, as I said, represented. And of course, there will be some form of financial relief for all the people who can't afford when the laundry machine breaks down. And then they also get a low energy laundry machine. I was telling my colleague here, because it will actually help them save a penny on their energy bills. So it's like we have an integrated a program here. There were a total of 5 aldermen were involved in writing this action line, because it's all about breaking down the silos and having people collaborate across the various departments at the town hall. And I think they did a good job. And if anyone is interested, I have an English version of that, because we translated it using DeepL. And then it's about spreading into Europe and beyond. And beyond is actually this part of the world. The southern hemisphere here, Australia, New Zealand, because that's what Stephen and I have been working on. The first step that I undertook was actually a collaboration with I have a second affiliation. I'm also a professor in Poland. So I work in this beautiful city of Wrocław. It used to be part of Germany till the Second World War. Then it became Poland. So all the heritage buildings are actually German, but it's now a fully Polish city. And then Krakow, that many people know, it's the most beautiful city in Poland, World Heritage. And we had a sample from Romania in Bucharest, and we said, can we use that instrument in these cities? So we started translating and doing validation, and time again, we actually had a partner from Macedonia, where you have a bilingual and bicultural capital city of Skopje, where people speak both Macedonian, Albanian, Muslim, Christian. So they joined as well. And time again, we saw that financial situation of people is the most important driving force behind experiencing age friendliness. And I said to myself, we need to have more countries, and then Turkey joined the party as the first country, and so on. And at the time that I'm standing here, I can say that we actually have the 6 working languages of the United Nations covered. We're just waiting for the final reviews from papers to come in, and then once that's all done, we can publish that safely. So what did we do in that program? We also came up with manifestos for policymakers that we did together with policymakers and older people. So it's always about having their voices heard of the older people. That was a great fun, because we had Dutch, Romanian, and Polish older people working together. It was with broken English sometimes, but we had great fun. We had interpreters there, by the way, but very productive program. But just Poland and Romania didn't really satisfy my needs. So in the end, we ended up with over 35 countries, including Japanese, and some of this work is already done. But we also have an Australian and New Zealand version these days, because that work has been completed as well. But I think it's good to actually go back to the original notes from the WHO, where they actually said something that's quite interesting. In the beginning, they were looking for a way to come up with an instrument. So they wrote, it's best to establish a series of common indicators from which individual cities can develop an index or way of grading and monitoring improvements from this index, if they wish for advocacy purposes. And then they said, this is not meant to be a tool that can cause inappropriately unfavorable international score comparisons. Well, this is what all the mayors in Europe are actually calling me for. Like, Joost, we need to have something so I can compare between me and my next door municipality, or between Austria and Germany, or between the Netherlands and Belgium. So this is what the mayors want, not what the WHO wanted to develop. But in the end, you know, this is what people want, so this is what people get. And they also said something like, yeah, we can develop an index for grading, and the indicator should look like a checklist of questions. And keep in mind, this is not a tool, this is a tool for policy advice, indeed. Because people like to have an index that can help them develop policies. So I'm happy that I delivered. So we had the cultural validation. It's just a very quick sum up, but it's not complete. The map is not complete, but we have a lot of countries that we're currently working on. I'm meeting up with people in New Zealand in August for these Pacific Island languages. So that's been, yeah, Melanie, yeah. So we have a lot of cities that are doing it. Every time we do this, we see finance, 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 finance. So I cannot repeat it too often. So then we did this in Adelaide, and I thought the people in Adelaide would be very much like the people in the Netherlands. Modest, not very outspoken. Life is good. When life sucks, you give yourself a 7 out of 10, you know, and when life is good, you give yourself an 8 out of 10. But that's not the case. And I was quite shocked, to be honest, because overall, the scores were in the green. But when we did the cluster analysis, we had this group who were really negative, really, really negative. So they were all in the red. But it's a small group, so we can be quite thankful of that. Then there's a huge group in the middle, which are like the average, I would say, the average Australian older people. They are doing pretty well. And of course, there's a richer cohort. But what I find really remarkable is that the spread in answers is much wider than what we have in the Netherlands. And when we're doing this paper together with people from the University of Adelaide and the University of South Australia, I was actually shocked to see the huge spread in answering categories. And when we did this in New Zealand together with Stephen, we had a similar set of results, I would say. But I like, this is why I'm showing you the names, because cluster one is definitely the disenchanted, because they have problems that they face in all their life. I thought that the score for transportation was really remarkable, but had to do with losing driver's licenses and with the lack of public transportation options. Then cluster two is the struggling group, so they're slightly better off than cluster one, but still a lot of challenges. Then cluster three, the managing group. We actually use that word now across Europe because we actually like it. They're doing okay, but if they find themselves in a life event and something that takes a turn for the worse, then they're in trouble. Then cluster four, happy and healthy, because the health element here was really important. They're doing fairly well. And then, of course, you have this rich group, which we find in every single country. Yeah, we call it life's good. We had the scores from Romania, don't show, but like this was the normal color in all of that column. If you're poor in Romania, you're really in trouble. If you're rich in Romania, you gave yourself a 9.6 out of 10. Everything was dark green, but it had private nurses, private driver, private gardener, private everything. That's Eastern Europe. But it's really interesting to see all these differences across the globe. And we're now doing a global comparison of all these personalities, and we try to come up with personas. What I'm really proud of, and this is what we pulled off last year in New Zealand, but in New Zealand they actually have a nationwide guide to running the age-friendly questionnaire. This is something that the Europeans are really jealous of. So I wouldn't be surprised that in 1 year from now, a couple of European governments will have published a similar is it a guideline? Yeah, a guideline. And I'm very happy with it. It really has a good look and feel, but it's also very easy to follow this manual. So this is what we've been working on together with Stephen. And that leads me to my last question, because how to move forward? Well, what I'm currently doing is putting all these data sets from all the different countries into one big data set and establish so-called measurement invariance, which tells me if we can if we can compare the data from all these cities. And I can tell you that yes, the measurement invariance indicators are really strong. We can do everything on an individual level. It's all scalar, so it's really like a strong instrument that allows us to compare results between countries and cities. We're just waiting for the paper to be accepted, but the review comments were good, and it actually allows for valid cross-border, cross-boundary comparisons. We also want to do a comparative paper with the Australian and New Zealand data sets because they were so similar, and then actually throw in the UK sample that we have as well, because I see a lot of similarities. And together with Stephen, we are thinking now about collecting data here in the Sunshine Coast or in the larger region. And I know we have additional data set that is currently in progress, I would say, in Unley, which is in the Greater Adelaide region, and potentially Darwin. We are going to negotiate that too. And I keep adding more countries and languages. Yesterday, I gave it a go with the UAE, with the United Arab Emirates, and we keep posting these tools online, and I know they get used quite often by government workers, by policymakers, and as I said, more national guidelines would be welcome. So that's my homework for the next year. I also say I need to push the narrative and change the discourse, especially about finance. If we keep overlooking finance, we will never achieve age friendliness in our communities. We will never improve the positions of older people. And I've been to Geneva on various occasions. I keep banging the drum like this age-friendly model needs to have an overhaul. It needs to be adjusted, it needs to be amended. It's not good enough. The revision is really necessary. And we need to come up with better tools for measuring instead of the core indicators. But I got a couple of friends with ministries of health, with people who have a background in clinometrics, who actually told people at WHO that what they produce is not good enough, that our tool is better. So I let them do the dirty work on my behalf. And we just keep working with all these partners from around the globe to come up with global typologies of age friendliness. And we actually managed to make 4 clusters out of that, which can still help policymakers around the globe. And what I'm also doing, and that's a bit of a sideline, but we've seen a lot of dementia-friendly cities and communities initiatives pop up in recent years. And we are currently working on a model and on instruments to measure the dementia friendliness of neighborhoods. And we're also doing this with partners from Adelaide. So I hope that in 1 year from now, we have a tool that can also be used in Australia. So that's a little bit of a glimpse of what I'm doing in the Netherlands and how it all relates to foreign activities. That's why I'm here traveling and visiting Stephen. So in a nutshell, that's what I've been doing for the last 6 years in my country.
Does anyone have any questions?
So I'm just asking you, you're looking at cities, I'm assuming, but is there any plans to look at regional areas more globally? Because, for example, I live here on the Sunshine Coast. Where I live, we actually have no public transport, none at all. I pay for it, but I don't get it. And so when I'm working community, looking at organising allied health visits, et cetera, it's what is available isn't necessarily available in a city area. So there's massive differences between regions and how people, if we did your survey, I think it would have very different outcomes from the people doing that. And then looking at councils, local councils, how would they then address this? And are local councils doing it? I mean, you're looking at a city, I'm sort of looking at this. So it can go everywhere, but I just would like to know whether there's any plans.
This is a good point you're raising, because if you go back to the original documentation of the WHO, they had questions about this too, global cities. And then they said, okay, cities and communities, but they gave a definition of what is a city or a community. That has to have, the place needs to have at least 50,000 inhabitants. Anything smaller than 50,000 is taken out of the equation. So I was in the NT like 2 weeks ago, and I said Alice Springs would not qualify, it would only be Darwin. So all the policies you make on an NT level would not be relevant or would not be applicable. And this is a problem. because I'm a professor of urban aging, but we also have professors of rural aging who are doing the other side of the equation, so to say. And the differences in the perceptions of all the people are totally different. And if I look at my own country, I come from the countryside. Like there's no more ATMs, no supermarkets, the GPS left. If you want to apply for a passport, you've got to drive 10 kilometers. But but that's not much. But for people, they complain because if you are not mobile, 10 kilometers can already be too much. But if you live in a remote setting here in Australia where there is simply no services, you've got to drive 200 kilometers to get your groceries, or maybe more, then this program is not tuned to the needs of rural people. And that is problematic. And I think we do need a rural version of the global guide. Not age-friendly cities, but age-friendly rural communities with all the challenges they have. Because at the moment, our policymakers overlook the needs of people living in rural communities, whether it's in the Netherlands, in the rest of Europe, or here in Australia, where we have really, really remote places. And I was talking to Stephen earlier this morning, and I said we need to actually do a validation of this model, and we know that some of the questions need to be replaced because there is no public transportation in rural communities here. So it's all about, do you have someone who can actually take you or drive you with a private car to the nearest hospital, nearest GP, nearest whatever. So there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. And I think this is also a bit of a bias on the side of the WHO because it's simply not acknowledged. Yes, it is acknowledged, but they don't do anything to cater for the needs of older people in a rural community, sadly. And it could have been a rural community in Brazil, could have been somewhere in Africa, in Russia, where you have huge distances to cover. So yeah, I think that Stephen you'll have to talk to Stephen. And
because there's a big community here for older people. We have a very high percentage of older people. Yeah, and I'm fast approaching.
yeah.
I'm nearly there.
Yeah, so you need to advocate for your own future needs. And this is how it works. And we have the same with island communities. So if you're on an island, you're stuck and there's no ferry boat to take you to the shore, then what can you do? It's the same as in the Netherlands. If you know the map of my country, you have the islands in the north. Some people need to be airlifted off if they have a heart attack and there's no more ferry boats, just a helicopter that will come and take them because it takes too long to get to the shore. Yeah, well, they also, they're all millionaires there, but the government will pay for it. And they have a lot of services like delivery of medication through drones and so on, because it's hard to reach because people think, oh, the distance is short, but it's all mud plains when you have low tide and you can't really navigate. So there are some similarities, I would say, even though the distances are much larger.
If I remember correctly, the slides you showed from the Netherlands, from The Hague, they had only 4 clusters. And then you saw that there was a different group in Australia. Can I ask you how you decided that, how do you call it, that there was this really negative group of people? How do you pick it up in the data that it was really a different cluster?
So that's a good question. You let the statistics speak. So we had k-means. You're familiar with clustering analysis or not? Yeah, the k-means hierarchical cluster analysis, and you look at the dendrogram. We have the cutoff point, and sometimes you just go like, is it 3 or is it 5? And we went with the 5 option because it was still robust. It was still statistically significant.
And we're surprised
that we had 5 groups. No, because we knew from other countries that the number of clusters could actually vary.
Okay.
But it's always between 4 and 5. One time we had 6. Where was that? China. But there we had a huge data set, like huge. Nearly 80,000 people, so. Then you get more subtleties that emerge. But I think it's actually good whether we have 4 or 5 doesn't really matter. It shows the heterogeneity of older people, and that we shouldn't treat older people as all being equal, that we have a lot of diversity, and that we need to cater for some of this diversity in needs. I think that's the most important eye-opener for many of the policymakers that I've been working with. And about the details of the cluster, they don't care. For them, it's the way to actually say to their older voters, because let's not, in Europe, sometimes the populations have 20 to 25% of older people, but that's not 25% of the voters, no, because the people till the age of 18 can't vote. So 30% of the electorate is made up by older people. So why shouldn't policymakers, politicians listen to the needs of older people? And they become more vocal across the continent, which I think is a good thing, because they were really underrepresented. Also, if you look at the politicians in the city councils, in the houses of parliament in my country, there's only 2 people in the Dutch parliament who are age 60 and over. Only 2 out of 150. No, actually 2 out of 225, because I also include the Senate. 25% of the population. Only 2 representatives. It's absurd. I think it's absurd because their voices are not being reflected by all the young people of my generation who are members of parliament. I think that's problematic. We have a great imbalance in political representation of the older people in our population. So I hope this kind of stuff, like the clustering analysis, actually helps.
There's a question online from Georgina. Thanks for the presentation. In Australia, we have a lot of issues with urban sprawl out of our cities. How will this impact healthy aging into the future? I would imagine people living in city centers would have a healthier aging experience, given it is normally more expensive to live in these areas.
Let me take on that question first, because it is relevant. It's the one thing that strikes me when I'm in Australia. Now I know why your car fuel is so cheap, because you really need to drive a car to get from A to B. Without a car in this country, you're lost. In my country, it's so densified that everything is within walking distances or within distances from a public transportation service, either a train or a tram or a bus. And it is problematic because it's really difficult in a country like Australia to offer high quality, high density public transportation options because of the urban sprawl. The distances are too large, not enough people to keep a bus line up and running. And then you're dependent on your car, but there's no infrastructure here for bicycles. We were just talking about the travel to Maastricht, but in my country, well, we're quite a bit of an outlier in Europe anyway, but we cycle a lot. And even the older people in our country, they all have electrical bicycles these days, and they just ride their bikes to get to a GP, to go meet friends. Car ownership in our country is relatively low, but it really keeps people healthy, fit, and active because they're all riding a bicycle, even though it has this additional motor or engine so that it's more comfortable to ride your bike. But still, instead of having your 10,000 steps or 7,000 steps a day, you actually pedal on your bicycle. And we have a lot of recreational bicycle paths, by the way, that people use just for leisure, and it helps them to stay active and fit. You go, even my parents, if they want to do groceries, it's always on a bicycle. They never use a car. But that's because all the services are rather nearby, close to your home. And I think that helps. And urban sprawl, I think it's horrible. I know Australia has a lot of land. It's a big country, but there would be some room for improvement. Because honestly, I was looking at new developments in Darwin and also in Port Macquarie, and the roofs are actually touching one another because even though people have a big plot, it's fully built upon. You know, there's hardly any gardens left. So why are you wasting all that land? Build more densely, but with more quality. But that's my Dutch bias, of course.
Here's another question.
Thank you for sharing the work with us. Given that many older people,
Yeah.
particularly women and migrants, are more likely to experience poverty in later life, how should cities better account for economic inequality in their age-friendly strategies beyond infrastructure and service provision?
Yeah, very good point, because one of the biggest struggles these people face are access to social participation, like events, activities, and so on. Because first of all, the information does not reach them, because they sometimes have outdated smartphones, not with the latest software. So some of the messages that are being sent out cannot be reached by them because it's not compatible with the latest version of iOS and so on. This is the first barrier. Sometimes they ask €1 or €2 or dollars, whatever, to participate in an activity. That can already be too much. Then they need to pay $1 for public transportation. That's also a barrier. So it all these dollars add up in the end. So the financial struggles or deprivation actually trickle down to all these 8 domains. And so the municipality, we know exactly in the Netherlands who is living in precarity and who are not, because of the way the benefits are, the welfare system works. And we know exactly who is living off social welfare and who are not. So the municipality has access to these databases, and they could actually say people get a special discount card for taxis or for trains and for buses and so on. But they could also give people discount for social activities. We do cater for migrant groups, because migrant groups do get invitations through their own network of people from the same ethnicity who speak the same language to go to certain events that are organized for this group. And because of the way the levels of cohesion within these groups are really strong, so they actually will make sure that grandma can participate, because someone will come pick this person up and move them towards a venue. But there are a lot of problems, and the municipalities can't solve all of them, but at least they are trying to help out because of the way we are organized. We don't have a census. We know real time who lives where, who's an inhabitant. You can't escape from the system. We know exactly where people live 24/7. It's monitored in real time. So we know exactly where people live who are in high need. And we also now have our GIS systems, like geographical information systems, and we use the data of that. We superimpose all these layers, and now we know if we want to build a new nursing home or a new residential area for all the people, or a residential flat for all the people, it needs to be here, there, because it's like a hotspot of all the services. It means a GP and a pharmacist and a supermarket are all nearby, and we don't build these facilities anymore in remote areas, because that would require too much traveling on the Dutch scale. And yeah, given that these special groups like older women and so on, some of these challenges are actually stuff for the federal government, not for the city on the city level, but even cities can do better than they currently do. And we also have the system of social housing. So 35% of the people in the country live in social housing. It's not something to be ashamed of. It's really better quality housing than what people have who own their own property, because it needs to be kept up with Dutch building code standards. So if the building code goes up in terms of insulation, you will get the insulation, you will get triple glazing in the end. So some of the people are better off living in social housing than in a privately owned property.
Kiara, thank you, Joost, for a very interesting presentation. Do you have any thoughts on why financial situation of older people was omitted from the WHO AFCC framework? I'm looking forward to meeting you, Melanie.
Hi, Melanie. Very good question. What I've been able to reconstruct from the notes that I got is that, first of all, WHO thought it was not a domain for the WHO, because it would mean that they had to work with ministers of pensions, which exist in some of the countries and the member state countries. So they said it was too far off. And they also said we don't want to put emphasis on the negative differences between the rich and the poorer countries, and this would just pop up as a major issue. They didn't want to have these negative cost country comparisons, so that must be a main driver. That they don't want to stress the divisive elements in the movement, but I think by omitting it, they did a great disservice to all the people, because these differences in one's financial status also occur in richer countries or more developed countries like Australia, like the Netherlands. Some people are better off than others. I see something funny in the chat. Someone superimposed the Netherlands, I think, on top of the Brisbane area. Yeah. That's why my sense of scale is a bit different. if you know, I will show you. I work in The Hague, which is there. I live in Eindhoven. I was born close to the border, so Maastricht is there where you were. But if we have to travel, it's like 1 hour by train. Everybody goes, oh, it's 1 hour. It's too far. If you're from Amsterdam and people have to travel outside of a radius of 10 kilometers, they already say, oh no, that's only farms there. They don't want to travel out. It's different kind of scale, but it also shapes our mentality, I would say, to some extent, and that's why we have to plead for densification, because we are running out of land if we want to keep some of the farmland unbuilt, like undeveloped. So we have to be smart with the land that's available.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Last minute questions? Thanks, Professor Joost. Everybody, please thank Professor Joost for coming and for his wonderful presentation.
My pleasure.
And to those of you online, thanks so much for joining us.
And I can have the slides shared with everyone who's interested.
Yep, we'll post them online.
Yeah, good, perfect.